Why
All
not?
right. Well, it looks like it's 10:30, so I'm going to assume it's okay to start. Hey, y'all, I'm Kelsey Hightower. Some of you may know me from the Kubernetes community, maybe during my configuration management today, but I'm here today to really talk about Argo CD, more importantly, as an advisor to the Akuity team to moderate the Akuity Platform Large. So if you're looking for that, you're definitely in the right place. We're going to go for about an hour today. We're going to have some questions at the end. And if you have any questions, of course, you can just use that QA tab at the bottom, post your question there. I'll be paying attention to those and I'll bring them up as appropriate. With me today, I have Jesse from one of the original creators of Argo CD. So if you've ever used the open source project in the past, he's one of the people who's worked on it and contributed to it over time. And we're just going to talk about, number one, a little bit about the open source community, the health of the community, and how that open source project underpins Akuity's platform that we'll be going through today. So with that, I'm going to introduce Jesse to the stage and turn it over to you. Welcome, Jesse.
Hey, thanks, Kelsey. Yeah, so I'd like to just kind of start by talking about where we are today with the project. And for me personally, it's been this amazing 5-year journey. I've been working on the Argo project full time now for across 3 different companies, and it just always blows my mind like what how far the project has come along and what people are doing with it. Um, and so, for if anyone's watching and they're new to Argo, just know that Argo is a collection of 4 projects actually, and they all have this singular focus on application delivery. And if you just looking at the net promoter scores, people just really love the product. And in fact, sometimes when we're walking down the street, more than once people have kind of stopped us if we're wearing the Argo shirt. People just stop us telling us that they love the project. And one of the big takeaways that I hope people get out of this webinar is just knowing that the health of the project is in good shape. We're in incubating CNCF project and we're approaching graduation. We have 5 corporate maintainers, and these are all companies that are investing their time and resources into the project. We actually meet like multiple times a week with different subgroups, talking about different topics like a committee dedicating to marketing and events. We have dedicated security meetings. We of course have those contributors meetings for both the workflow track and also the CD and rollouts track. Then there's the community meeting that we have monthly. And there's even just one dedicated to the UI. And so there's a lot of people behind this project, and they're not just referring to developers, right? It's doc writers and marketing people and developer evangelists. So just to kind of help illustrate the point, is this is a slide that you might have seen that CNCF publishes often about just project velocity. And so if you don't know, CNCF tracks projects metrics based on things like commits, number of authors, comments, pull requests. And based on these criteria, Argo is consistently in that upper right quadrant of velocity. And I just pulled this from the last month, but even in 2021, we were right around the same place. So next, this is probably one of my favorite stats. So this graph is actually showing who is actually contributing to the project by company. And the thing I like the most about this graph is just highlighting the diversity of the maintainers. So as you can see, it used to be the case that Argo was mainly developed by one company into it, but as you can see over time, it becomes a more healthy distribution of companies. And if anyone is interested in learning more or connecting with us or just getting involved in the project, like one of the best opportunities that's coming up is ArgoCon, which is actually happening next week. And this is our second ever ArgoCon. It'll be a hybrid event held in Mountain View. And if you do come in person, Akuity will be hosting an advanced Argo CD workshop at no extra charge at our office in Sunnyvale.
All right. So Jesse, look, you took us through the health of the project. And as someone who's worked at a few startups that were backed by open source projects, Puppet Labs during the configuration management days, I was at CoreOS, where we built tools like etcd and some of the tools that are using the Kubernetes ecosystem today. I know how challenging it can be to kind of maintain those open source projects, yet also address some of your customer needs, those enterprise needs, things that may or may not be appropriate for the open source kind of project as a whole. And I think a lot of people are here to find out, like, you started this company with your co-founders, and what are you all are up to? What are you all building? What is this Akuity platform? And you know me, I like to see it. So hopefully we can get some demo action going.
Yeah, of course. So let's get this out of the way. So let's talk about our mission first of all. So Akuity's mission is to modernize the application delivery landscape for the cloud native era. And by cloud native, what we really mean is Kubernetes. But the way we'll be doing that is we'll be developing this next generation of application delivery tools that fit into this new paradigm. And one of those tools in this new tech stack is going to be Argo. So when we started Akuity, what we felt was missing in this enterprise space was a true vendor of this project. So I'm referring to like a company that could provide training, support, solution engineering, someone who could help develop those enterprise specific integrations, and just help promote the project and drive adoption.
All right, Jesse, I'm going to throw you off a game a little bit. So before we pivot to the demo, you mentioned primarily Kubernetes.
Yeah.
Is that like a conscious choice? Like, why not VMs, for example?
Yeah, because I think more and more what we're seeing is that one, people want to containerize, right? So just the development velocity that you get by deploying through containers in itself is a huge benefit. And so, but if you containerize, you need like an orchestration platform. And by now, Kubernetes is essentially the de facto solution for orchestrating containers. So to us, it makes sense to go all in on Kubernetes. And I think you'll agree with me, Kubernetes is starting to become, not just for running workloads, right? So Crossplane is a great example of using Kubernetes as a control plane of your infrastructure. We use it ourselves, and so what we are seeing as a trend is the Kubernetes API model is going to be a way that people use more and more, not just for running their apps. Yeah. So these are all just reasons we started Akuity. And we wanted to be a vendor to also just actually run and manage Argo for them, for those of those who didn't want to, invest in a platform team that to understand and learn, be Argo experts. Yeah. So let's get into the actual platform. And so what we decided to do is build a SaaS product. And so what the Akuity platform is, it's an application design for DevOps engineers where they can create, manage, configure their Argo CD instances. So if you consider Argo CD as your control plane of clusters, then Akuity platform is a control plane of control planes. So when we were talking to customers to figure out what was important to them and enterprises, there was a common theme of features that they were looking for, things like user management, access control, enabling more self-service, but most importantly, just making things easy to install, configure, and upgrade. Not everyone needs to be or should be an Argo expert. We've actually even had companies approach us with like a horror story where there's maybe one engineer that had set everything up for them, And then they abruptly left the company, and now the rest of the engineering team is kind of left picking up the pieces. And this is Argo is like a critical piece of their infrastructure. They were kind of like rushed to get help, and so no one should have to kind of go through that. And we can offer a reliable platform for running Argo itself. And so what I'd like to show in this first part of the demo is just like how easy we've kind of made this experience to just get something quickly up and running, which is secure, highly available, and scalable. Okay, so let's see. So this is what you're seeing here is the Akuity Platform portal. This is a managed service that we host. And the first thing you'll notice is has some typical things that you should come to expect from an enterprise product. We have documentation, a way to get support, and things that enterprises need is the a concept of teams and organizations. So we do have a concept of an organization. It's a way you can invite members to your organization, manage their access. You can actually be part of multiple organizations, which is greater for like larger companies that need a different level of tenancy or and granularity. And so we can switch between different orgs here. And so to create an instance, it's really simple. Just basically give it a name, right? So I'll just call it webinar demo. And you can choose your version and click create. So yeah, and then after a few minutes, this thing should be up and running. But to save time, I have a pre-created instance, which I can show that is already up and running. And so from here, this is where you want to actually configure your Argo CD instances. So for example, the first thing you might want to do after creating an instance is managing access. So maybe you want to come here, enable the admin account. And
Jesse, could you zoom in a little bit? Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. It actually has this, so I made it a little wider screen. Okay, so yeah, so maybe you want to enable the admin account or create some local user accounts or configure SSO, and so all of these settings that users are used to kind of going to config maps and editing manually. They can now all do it through this UI. So, maybe I want to add a banner like, code freeze, do not deploy, and then and I can save this. As soon as I apply this, we'll apply those changes to the config map, and then now when you visit this thing, you'll get this banner. So making changes like this is super easy in the Akuity platform. But let's actually go to what is it like to actually manage a cluster. And so to connect a cluster, it's also as simple as creating an instance. I'll go ahead and create Jesse K3S demo, and what you just give it a name. Once this cluster is this cluster entry is created, you can. This is something different about the normal Argo CDs. You copy this and you actually install it into your managed cluster. And I'm just going to install this in my local K3S. I just created this before this meeting. And what happens is once I create this cluster entry, it then becomes a entry in Argo CD itself. So this Jesse K3S demo is now a deployable target that I can deploy to from Argo CD. And really from here on out, it's the exact same Argo CD experience that you know and love. We didn't want to create a different version of Argo CD and change up the user experience. Any improvements that can be there, we want to contribute it back upstream, right? And so, yeah, just to recap, what Akuity Platform is, it's a managed service, and it's aimed at DevOps engineers, and in short, it just takes away all of these operational burdens of running Argo CD.
All right, we saw a lot there, and it definitely looks like there's a bunch of new components here. Number one, there's this new UI to kind of manage things that I remember like dealing with like through config maps and command line tools. And so the first question I have is, what do you have to change on the open source side to get all of this working? Or is it just kind of an overlay that sits right on top?
Yeah, great question. We didn't change anything like with the open source. So what we did though, well, actually, before we get into it, I actually should explain to people kind of how the Argo CD architecture actually works. So this is like the normal upstream of Argo CD. So here you have a few core components which are shown here, and you typically install this in a control plane cluster, and that control plane cluster manages remote clusters where you run your workloads. And one thing to note is it has this controller component, and this controller is actually making an outbound connection to all of these managed clusters that it needs to manage. But this design actually has some challenges, especially as you increase your usage. And one thing to know about Argo CD is that it's really chatty. In order to show all of those real-time updates in our UI, the controller is getting this fire hose of Kubernetes updates and resource activities, and they're all just constantly being streamed over the network. Because what's happening behind the scenes is Argo is doing this continuous watch of all resource kinds in the cluster, and you multiply this by a lot of busy clusters, and you might be like we've spent at Intuit like $1,000+ a month on traffic alone, and so and then a second concern is about security. So if you think about what's actually happening here, Argo CD it needs direct access to these clusters in order to manage it. So from a networking standpoint, you do need to make your Kubernetes API servers public somehow, or set it up in a way such that your firewalls make it connectable from Argo CD. And also, if you look at this, Argo has the keys to the kingdom here. So for every cluster it manages, the kube credentials have to also be given to this controller just because it manages it. And now Argo CD becomes this really high value target for people. And the last thing that people eventually hit as they scale up their cluster usage is scalability. So this controller component that you see here, there's a limit to what it can handle. So as you are adding more and more clusters, you have to keep bumping up those CPU and memory requests and limits. But there's a limit to that, right? So then you start needing to shard the controller. So maybe you run multiple controllers and assign different clusters to different shards. If you get past that, you probably want to start adding some tuning variables to say, okay, start ignoring some of these resources that I don't manage, right? But we've actually given talks about this in the past, but ideally these are not things that users should be thinking about. And so let's move on to what we've changed or what we've done. So essentially what we've done is we've separated the control plane from the data plane. And what I mean by that is that we've moved these core components, the ones that do all the heavy lifting, closer to its source. And we run them directly on the managed clusters. And and we don't, by the way, we don't install any CRDs in those managed clusters. So the only thing that runs is just stateless deployments. So this has like a number of advantages. First is we've actually minimized the traffic usage. Because the controller is now running in cluster, it really only sends back a minimal amount of like status metadata back to the control plane, basically the stuff that needs to be visualized and shown in the UI. But it also increases that security model of Argo CD. And we've done it in two ways, right? So the first is you can keep those clusters private, right? With this architecture, the managed cluster only needs just an outbound internet access back to the control plane, instead of the other way around, right? With the control plane needing access to the Kube API server. And we actually think this will open the door up for more use cases in Argo CD, like such as managing clusters at the edge. And also you'll notice that none of the cluster credentials are actually being stored in the control plane anymore. Like we don't need those credentials anymore, because the agent is the one that has the appropriate service account, and that thing is only getting certain instructions to deploy from the control plane. And finally, we've increased the scalability characteristics of Argo CD, because we essentially are distributing the workload amongst like individual clusters. So with this, you don't ever worry about things like sharding and scaling, because now everything is kind of happening at the source. So just to summarize, with the Akuity Platform architecture, you get the same Argo CD experience, but with improvements to cost by reducing your traffic. You get security benefits by allowing for more restrictive networking setups and limiting need to store credentials, and improve scalability by moving that data plane closer to that source.
And it's good to see this architecture evolve in this way, because I think when most people start with Kubernetes, whether they're prototyping or building a new system, whether it's like ISTI or anything that leverages the Kubernetes API, you tend to start with everything in one cluster. You make all of these assumptions about access and the size of the API server, but tend to see when things mature, you start to get that clear separation that you mentioned, the data plane versus the control plane. And I think you answered one of the questions that I saw come in chat. I think Nick, one of my colleagues that works at Google Cloud, and he says, is Akuity effectively suggesting that the hub and spoke model is kind of the preferred way of scaling out larger Argos installs? And based on this diagram, I think that's exactly what you're suggesting. Is that correct?
Yeah. In fact, the early days of Argo CD, we actually had this kind of a design debate about it. We ended up going the other way, obviously, where it's all centralized. And I think a lot of it had to help deal with the ease of upgrades. Like it's a hard problem to solve if you need all of these distributed components to get upgraded at the same time. But that's actually something we handle for you as part of our platform. So Argo CD components should always be updated in lockstep. Like, so if your controller is getting upgraded, your API server and the stuff also should go and upgrade it in lockstep. And that is a feature of our platform as well, is that say you go from Argo CD 2.3 to 2.4, we will run like an upgrader job inside the managed cluster, so that it upgrades with the central thing. But if we had to do it over again, we had more time in the beginning, that we might have gone with this approach from the get-go.
Yeah, I think you probably made a good choice. I mean, I think whenever introducing new technologies, it's always good to have a low friction install option for PLCs, et cetera. And even traditionally, when I first got started with systems, there was always the minimal install and then the larger production ready install. So it's kind of great to see both of these things maintained. Now, look, so far, I think a lot of the Akuity platform we've covered so far really talks about that day zero, onboarding new clusters, getting agents in play, getting people access to those clusters. And I know there's another part to this demo set, and I know there's so many other things that are kind of application centric. I think there's things like an extensions and all of that. So maybe we pivot to the next phase of the demo.
Yeah. Yeah. So far, what we've talked about was things like just kind of the basics, right? The instance management. We did go into like, what's unique about our architecture. And so now it's kind of a good time to show, what additional value add type of features that we're starting to do on top of Argo CD and complementary to Argo CD, right? The first thing that we built is application metrics. So this is something that enterprises love to kind of see developer velocity and activity. And so Argo CD, we have this understanding of what's happening inside clusters. We're getting these events. So why not store them? And so that in long term, so that people can see over time, what is exactly happening in the cluster. So we got like a summary of what the current state is, but we also got some history about over time the synchronizations that happen. Maybe this one was a failed sync, right? This application metrics was just kind of one basic thing that we could add. But another thing enterprises are looking for are things like audit trails. And so just like we can store some long-term metrics about application activity, we can also store long-term things about what individual users are actually doing with either changing settings or actually in the applications themselves. Because without this, if you delete an application, you've kind of lost like what happened. But here we can record long term in case you need to trace back, some event, consequential event that happened, and see who did what and why and when.
Now, for those that are new, and I'm going to have some questions here too. I'm guessing this is like, hey, people are kicking off Argo CD runs. These are other automation tools. It could be something that people kick off on instance or people using the platform directly. Is this audit log telling you like, hey, there's been people that are updating, creating jobs? Is that what this is for? Is that to try to give visibility? I would imagine this becomes even more important once you start having multiple clusters that are actually kicking off and executing these jobs. Is this what that's for?
Yeah, exactly. So, and one thing to keep in mind, this is across the organization, right? So we will, add filters to make this more queryable. But it's ideally you should not have to come to this page. Like this is kind of more of a if something bad goes wrong, you come here and figure out, like, backtrack, like, hey, what happened, or maybe in the future you can access this information and detect, like, hey, why are we getting all of these kind of anomalous activity going on here?
Yeah,
but
it looks like from this audit log, it looks like you might have a compromised cluster. Someone's definitely mining Bitcoin.
Exactly. Yeah. So, so someone, Mike, I guess his name is, created this Bitcoin miner application for some reason. So, if without this thing, how would you know that happened? Yeah. So yeah, that's an odd log. I mean, it's it's kind of like the minimum we could do, I would say. But I want to kind of move on to kind of something I'm personally more excited about, which is if we go to an Argo CD instance, there's this tab over here called extensions. And so I think not many people know that Argo CD is actually extensible. I've actually given a talk about this very topic at the last North American KubeCon. But yeah, it is possible to extend the Argo CD UI interface and create new visualizations directly in the UI, and you can do it at a resource level, or you can just recently we added the ability to do it at an application level. And I know Intuit is actually working on a metrics extension, and so that's something we're also looking forward to. But um, but yeah, so one of the first and our flagship extension is the Argo rollouts dashboard, and what we're doing in our platform is just making it really easy to discover extensions. Like these, we want to put things that the community is developed here and make it, and people discover those extensions and get access to them really easily. We'll have our own extensions like specific to our platform. Um, but yeah, I'm personally oh, and I forgot to mention like things like config management plugins, right? So there's already a whole like years and years ecosystem of config management plugins like the Vault, and so those are all things that people should know about and not have to always keep their eye on the Argo project to figure out what's going on. Like if they can kind of see one popping up here, and it's like, oh, that's neat. Let me, try that one out. Okay, it didn't work out. Uninstall it. So just making that much more easier is something like
I have a
we
question
we want to
regarding
do.
extensions. I think one of the things that changed the game for Kubernetes in general was this concept of CRDs, right? Custom resource definitions. And
Yeah.
we kind of gave people this surface to add new workload types. And I think Argo rollouts and everything we're looking at here is taking advantage of all of those extension points. What type of things should be extensions, right? What type of things do you envision people doing here? And then how do those extensions interact with the rest of the platform?
Yeah. So maybe the best way to illustrate this is actually to look at one. So I mentioned the rollout extension was a good example. So rollout has some interesting ways to know what's going on, right? So, for example, a rollout itself has a set of steps that it should be go through as part of an update. So maybe in this example, I'm increase the traffic weight to 25% and then wait, then unpause it and then it go to 50%. So rather than staring at this thing to figure out what is going on with the rollout, it's much better to look at this, right? This is a much easier way to visualize and understand what's going on. So this is maybe what we call a resource extension, and we can do this for other types of complex resources. I think people would probably love an Istio extension or some cross-plane extensions, right? So that's at the resource level. But
one more question I have on that
yeah.
topic. So it looks like, are these read-only extensions? I can see how they can definitely surface that data, read data from the status fields, but I can imagine people wanting to take action with these extensions. Like if there's a pause, can I use the extension to unpause?
Oh yeah. So we call that feature actions. So that it's a good point because you could consider that as something that you also want to have a catalog for and a marketplace for as well. So you specifically talk about the unpause. So that is actually right here. So it's grayed out right now because this rollout is not in a state for which it can be unpaused. It's already fully rolled out. But this is definitely something I would want to expose in this UI because those actions that I'll probably ask people. We'll probably rename this to so it's not just extension, but like include actions. But there should be a page here to show like, okay, for a rollout object or some other thing, like let's enable the set of actions for that one. Maybe yeah. So that is performing actions is something equally as important as extending the UI. Yeah.
All right.
So
So is there, I guess there was I mean, you showed us a lot of stuff here. Maybe we summarize a little bit about what we just saw here, right? Because I think you digged a lot into some of the day 2, the day 3 stuff, a lot of application focus. We talked about extensions. Maybe quick recap that part before we pivot over to the roadmap.
oh sure. Yeah, so like I said, the type of stuff we want to offer is complementary to the core Argo experience. So the you'll notice like this is you get this is just still the same Argo CD experience that you know and love, but um, but we want to do these additional things to kind of round out the that Argos what we feel is like missing right from the uh, open source, right? And some of this stuff is appropriate to do upstream, like and then some of it is kind of a layer on top, right? And in my mind, I have like it's pretty clear in my mind, like what should go upstream and what should be available in a separate product, like things that span across Argo CD instances, for example, at the organization or enterprise level. So those are the type of things that we will continue to invest in, implement in our platform.
All right. Well, let's jump over to the roadmap.
Yeah.
I think one thing that, especially when I was at Puppet Labs and CoreOS, everyone wanted to know, number one, what's the roadmap? What's driving that roadmap? And what can we expect in that split you just mentioned, right? Like there's open source, I will give a good example, like in the Kubernetes community, all cloud providers knew that we had to do deeper integration with things like IAM, RBAC, security, et cetera. But we also knew as open source maintainers that we had to do that work in the core of Kubernetes itself, get all the right APIs in place so that control planes could sit on top. And so maybe, give us a little bit of maybe your vision as well, right? As one of the originators of this project, CTO of Akuity itself, maybe talk a little bit about this roadmap and your vision for where things go from here.
Yeah. So, so just to kind of show what's available now, it's kind of all those enterprise class features that you should come to expect from a SaaS and enterprise product. So I don't want to kind of repeat myself there. But what's more interesting is what we have in store. So when we talk to our early access users and beta users, like one thing we've heard is like they love what they're seeing, right? But they have some requirements of use of SaaS. So self-hosted is one of the things we hear again and again. Like they want to take what we've built, but they want to host it themselves, and that's definitely possible the way we designed this product. I already kind of mentioned things like expanded extensions catalog, but also the actions that I just mentioned, the config management plugins, like those we should be just one-click installs in Argo CD. Those analytics that I showed, that's also just the beginnings. I would say we know we can dig a little deeper and provide and surface more information about I like to call it like resource analytics, right? But we do have the ability to kind of show more information. We're just kind of not showing it yet, right? Like but the information is there. But more importantly is that Argo CD itself has it should be improved to have continue this theme of making it more extensible. Like one of the things that we are pushing for is having deep links in the Argo CD UI. So what I mean by that is a lot of times people, they're looking at their application, they can see the logs in Argo CD, but then they need to get to the next thing. Like, okay, I need to look at the our Grafana dashboard specific to this pod. So This feature is all about, providing just, a template, a user customizable template in the Argo CD UI so that they can, from the interface, they can just jump directly to the relevant third-party application specific to where they were looking at right before. Other things we're contributing back is like the notification is left to be desired. So um, so upstream, we want to improve that experience of configuring an application to get to send notifications when certain events. But the last one I think is probably the one thing I think everyone hits, which is okay. You installed Argo CD. Day one, you installed Argo CD, and you might have been able to deploy an application, and so your proof of concept works. But then there's this whole what I like to call day two experience that comes next. It's like, okay, now what I do? You have to. There's a lot of, I think, lack of opinions. I would say is the right way. People don't know how to structure their repos, or for example, or just everyone is kind of building their own bespoke tooling about what to how to deploy from pipelines and stuff. And so we think there's a place here to kind of have standards or form opinions or create additional tooling, and it's and this doesn't belong in Argo CD. It deserves its own uh, you know in its own application. Yeah.
All right, so look, I think this is perfect example of the roadmap. It's been nice to kind of see where things are. I know the company's fairly new and just getting started. We're going to have a Twitter space later. Maybe we'll post it here in the chat. I'll try to dig up the link. I know there's going to be some events coming up here soon. I'm just going to label them here. You all can read for sure. You got ArgoCon coming up. You can hit that link, get registered and join. There's going to be some things going on at KubeCon, of course. So that's October 24th. And of course, if you want the free trial, there's the link. You can get on the free trial. We're going to take a few questions, and then I'm going to get out of here in about 13 minutes or so to start the Twitter space to continue a more generic discussion around Argo CD itself, the future of declarative pipelines. And of course, I'm pretty sure you and people from the team will have a lot of input there. So I'm going to start with some of the questions. I know they've been answered, but I'm going to give you a chance to answer them for people that are going to be watching the video later. So one of the first questions I think people have is, are all the config options included in the Helm chart, or Argo CM config map available? I guess people want to know, will that UI give access to configure all the things?
Yes. So the goal is to just reach 100% parity with all the settings available in Argo CD. And I think we probably are really close to 100. If not, I think we reached it. It was a goal to just make everything available that you can do in the config maps of Argo CD available as like this settings and UI. So.
All right, so the next question, look, the console looks amazing. I'm pretty sure people tend to get started with those things doing ClickOps. You click around, you do things. But of course, after you're used to the platform, the next question is, will there be an API available so that people can automate the bootstrap and config process of new Argo CD instances?
Yeah, not just that, but clusters as well. So we are actually working on a formalized REST API for as well as like probably it'll be generated from gRPC. So I think there'll be a SDK to come along with it. So the idea is that to automate the Argo CD creations, there will be both a CLI API and SDK to be able to do that. But I think what's more important than that is actually the cluster provisioning, because it's more common that you will want to automate the provisioning of new cluster entries than it is for instances. And that is kind of like the primary driver to develop this REST API and SDK and CLI.
All right, so let's go on to the next question. Look, you're providing this control plane. Lots of people are going to have concerns around multi-region, DR, and also people want to know, in addition to the fully managed thing that's coming from the Akuity team, will they have the ability to do self-manage, maybe pick their own regions or run it themselves?
Yeah, okay. That's a great question. So one of the things to know about so we're Argo CD needs a kube cluster, right, to house its CRDs. But the thing that people should really understand is that this is actually we did spend a lot of time on this to make sure that data is actually persisted and accessible in cross region. So uh, and also so that it can be snapshotted and backed up periodically. So today we can claim that we are disaster recovery because those things are in place as of today in case like the how workload cluster goes down or the EKS cluster is actually deleted. We can recover from that. Yeah.
All right, fantastic. Maybe we'll take one more before we kind of pivot away. A lot of these have good answers. Here we go. This one says, are you planning to add other Argo projects to the SaaS that were provided? So what other Argo projects do we think will be seen as part of the Argo platform going forward, or Akuity platform going forward?
Yeah, so it's too early to say for now, but I mean, I think I would say the only other project that well, let me take that back. Um, so it workflows is probably an obvious uh, possible direction to kind of house this up. One thing to know though is these projects tend to have different characteristics of how they are installed, right? So traditionally, if you think about Argo CD, it's installed in a control plane and it manages remote clusters. On the other side of things, you have workflows and rollouts, which are just your normal, what you think of Kubernetes controllers, which run inside um, you want the CRD to be installed in the cluster. So we have given this a lot of thought, and we're still thinking of ways to make that more manageable than it is, because I do think there's room for improvement. Let's just say on how to
Yeah, because it
manage
sounds like
that
there's a
balance.
split between like a platform like Argo CD
Yeah.
versus workload types like Argo workflows, right? Like some of these are just like extensions of Kubernetes itself. They give you new workload types. And then one is kind of a platform for actually providing kind of end application rollouts and management. Is that how you all think about it? Like workloads versus platforms?
I think you hit the nail on the head. Like that's exactly kind of the the mental debate that you have about, well, you kind of want rollouts to be installed in every cluster that is. You actually even might want them to be at different versions, right? Because you're not, maybe prod is not comfortable with the bleeding edge of rollout. So but like I said, like to manage all of these things in clusters, I mean, you could use Argo CD for that. That's actually, probably the best thing you could do right now is actually, um, but there could be other ways, and that's something we're scratching our heads about.
All right, I'm going to leave you with one last thing. Having the vision for where this thing goes next. You finally have a lot more flexibility by having a centralized control plane. I think you got a fantastic business model of giving customers and people who need help a place to get that help going forward. What kind of features do you think's going forward, given this flexibility, given this platform as kind of that base layer? What's some of the things that the team is kind of brainstorming and imagining being able to provide to allow your customers to eventually be able to do? And we'll end with that one.
Yeah. So a lot of it kind of has to do with what I said about those day two things. I we think Argo is just the one pillar, I would say, of kind of the bigger picture. There's actually a reason we didn't call this thing Acuity CD. Let me put it this way: like we called it Acuity Platform for a reason because we think Argo CD is just going to be part of the overall kind of solution. Um, and so, without giving away too much, I think what we thinking about, um, you know, I think a lot of those those what comes next after you install Argo CD remains like unsolved.
Let's leave it there. What
Yeah.
comes next? All right, look, I'm going to wrap the webinar here. Thank you all for your questions. We're going to continue a general discussion around Argo CD, the open source project, the state of declarative pipelines. We're going to be joined by folks from the Akuity team, including Jesse. There'll be some other people from the community there as well. And if you've never been in one of those Twitter spaces, it's a really organic way. It's audio only. The link is inside of the chat. We'll see you there at 10:30. Jesse, fantastic presentation. We're really happy to see Akuity kind of doing this thing and helping people shape the future going forward. And to all you all, thanks for spending time with us, and we'll catch y'all next time. Later.
Hey, thank you.